Welcome back to Switchback F1. Today we're going to be looking at is F1 just driving around in circles? I've been an F1 fan for many years and remember watching races as early as 2004, the last year of Schumacher domination. I didn't truly start watching F1 until around 2007, and where sometimes I haven't paid as close attention, namely the years of Seb and Lewis domination, and yes, I'll admit sometimes the racing isn't always thrilling, but I've always kept my eye on the sport for those moments of magic, drama, battles, controversy, and full races of adrenaline. With all this being said, by friends, family, and colleagues who do not watch motorsport, they simply don't seem to get it. And all too often, the question us motorsport fans hate comes up. Isn't F1 just watching cars drive around in circles? Well, straight off the bat, looking at these tracks, technically it's already a no. Here's a picture of a circle, and here's a picture of some of the circuit layouts. Unless you're a bit dense, you can tell they're clearly not circles, mate. All jokes aside, in today's video I'm going to investigate whether, specific shapes aside, the sentiment of the question, is F1 just watching cars drive around in circles, a myth, or is there some truth to the claim? To do this, we'll look to break down the elements of F1 with points of how this can impact races or championships, and at the end of the video, why if you haven't done before, you should give the sport us petrolheads all love a chance. It's not seconds, tenths, or hundredths that count, it's every millisecond that can make the difference. F1 is one of the only top flight sports where every millimetre in performance and track time is chased to be found, and can cost F1 teams millions of pounds to lose out of the competition even by a fraction of a second. The first element is strategy. Strategy is a key player in determining any F1 race, from undercutting your closest competitor on track, where you pit before your rival with the aim of going faster on fresher tyres, and they pit and return on track, you'll have passed them gaining track position, and an overcut being where you stay out and your closest rival on track pits because you can go faster with the pace in hand, building a gap to your rival that's bigger than the time you'd lose in the pits, and with your pit stop going smoothly, you return on the track ahead. At every F1 race, cars have to pit to change tyres at least once. In 2024, we had 413 pit stops, and it's crucial for every team to be perfect every single time, or risk losing valuable points or even wins and podiums. The average time lost in the pits can range per track as it's layout dependent, but typically it's around 20 to 25 seconds from entering the pits to the time drivers return on track, with an average pit stop itself taking 2 to 3 seconds. Are you leading the race and have a slow stop? Countless times drivers have won or lost races with the pit stop being delayed, even by tenths of a second. It can hand that first place on a platter to your rival. Even though teams must make at least one stop at certain races, it can be beneficial to make 2 or 3, making up the time with pace of the car on fresh tyres, whilst those around you are on old tyres to struggle for grip. And teams invest millions into analytics of previous races held at a track, the long run pace of the car, the difference in fresh versus old tyres, and much more data to try and predict what will be the optimal amount of stops to ultimately finish on top. It sometimes isn't clear what is the best strategy, and a lot of the time this ends up being some of my favourite types of race, as it mixes up the order of the cars mid-race. When drivers do different amounts of stops, it leaves the drivers and the fans wondering who will be ahead and who will be caught out, adding a layer of unpredictability and most of the time, great wheel-to-wheel action. In current F1, Pirelli offer 8 compounds. On a dry or mostly dry track, the softer the compound, typically the faster the car goes, but the softer the tyre, the faster the tyre degrades, which is a loss of the tyre's grip and performance from factors such as heat, wear and pressure. Essentially, the more the tyre degrades, the slower the car will go, and the more the tyre wears out, the higher the chance of it bursting from overuse or being too hot. The tyre range includes normal race tyres, intermediates and full wets. Normal race tyres being the most racing conditions, intermediates for when it rains but it's not soaking, and full wets being, as you might have guessed, in heavy rain. However, nowadays we barely see full wets as the FIA typically deem these conditions too dangerous to drive in. There are currently a total of 6 compounds of the normal racing tyres from hardest to softest. They are the C1, C2, C3, C4, C5 and C6. Each race, the FIA selects 3 of these compounds to use for that specific race based on past race data and what the FIA and Pirelli decide will make for the most exciting race. You won't typically see, for example, C1, the hardest tyre, and the C6, the softest tyre, used in the same weekend, as the performance difference would be huge, and so each tyre would usually be within a step or two of each other. For example, C1, C2 and C3 for one weekend, or C1, C3 and C4 as a choice for the weekend. These tyres are then coined the hard, medium and soft tyres respectively. You'll often hear the commentator refer to drivers being on the quote-unquote right tyre at the right time in a race, as pitting for the best tyres for current conditions can alter your fate, and if you come in too early or too late, you'll see those who get it right move in front. F1 drivers aren't just driving foot to floor every lap of the Grand Prix as they'd eat their tyres and their pace would fall off a cliff. Instead, they manage the race alongside their race engineer. The race engineer is essentially the coach over the radio to the driver, telling them when to push flat out, when to lift and coast over the corners and bumps, how to maximise pace during the race, including suggested racing lines, braking points, steering inputs, and data from other drivers to see who is maximising lap time. They'll even try to help on where to deploy battery power, giving the car extra speed, or in battles for position or engine modes and switches and steering the wheel. Part of not just sport, but any story, whether that be media such as films, books, TV shows or radio, as well as other mediums such as music or comedy, and so on, would not be anywhere as entertaining without the personalities behind the story. Whether that's Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Luke Littler in darts, Erling Haaland in football, or Chris Evans on the radio, you need someone to root for or relate to, and someone to root against, and F1 is no different. Only 20 drivers out of the millions of hopefuls can be honoured enough to make it to the sport's top level, and to do so, not only being fast is enough. Financial backing, endorsements and marketability make a huge part of the deciding factor to teams of who they sign and who doesn't make the cut. With personality being one of the biggest factors to this, since the explosion of popularity in social media and Netflix's hit show Drive to Survive. We, the audience, have never been closer to drivers and insights of how they are as people, allowing us to relate and connect to those drivers. I personally love Lando Norris due to his charming and funny persona and the fact that he seems to care about his fans and those around him. I personally find it hard to connect with Lance Stroll and don't care much for him, as he comes across as entitled, arrogant and dismissive of the very sport he partakes in, which partly has to come from his billionaire father owning the team he races for, Aston Martin. Seeing how the drivers live on social media makes us feel like a small part of their lives, and when there's announcements such as Charles Leclerc's recent engagement, for example, even though for most of us we haven't met him in person, we feel happy, sad, annoyed or frustrated for them, depending on the situation your favourite driver finds themselves in. Iconic rivalries such as Senna vs Prost, Lewis vs Max, Lauda vs Hunt, Schumacher vs Hakkinen and Piquet vs Mansell are a few examples of rivalries that have left fans on the edge of their seats, creating stories within the seasons they battle, and also etched into the history of F1 forever. These are the moments we all look back on, and I defy anyone to find these rivalries boring. From crashing your teammate out for the title, fiery crashes, swapping wins with your rival, fights off and on the track, what's not to like, as each opponent tries to gain the upper hand each and every moment. Everyone loves an underdog, the guy with an outside chance, may be written off by the critics early doors to storm through the field throughout the season and snatch the title out of the hands of the opponent. A fifth place on the last lap of the last race for Lewis in 08 perhaps, or a win over squabbling teammates in 07 for Kimi, a last lap overtake in 21 for Verstappen. Your rival falls to P11 and a P4 being just enough for Fittipaldi in 74. These moments make us jump for joy, or if you're rooting for the other guy, punch the floor with frustration. Moments like this and amazing stories such as Lauda's comeback in 76 after a fiery crash in Germany, returning 42 days later to race in Monza, Vettel turning a 24-point championship deficit to a 13-point lead before the last race in 2012, Perez's last first win in Sakir 2020, and Verstappen's 17th to first masterpiece in the wet at Brazil last year. These are the moments that make the sport more than a weekend's entertainment, but for many, the stories they'll tell their children and children's children, feeding generations of fans. The drama, controversies, crashes, rivalries, hard racing and driver relationships keeps us rooting for our favourite driver or the underdog striving to reach the top. We also have to have people to root against, whether it's the cheats such as Crashgate with Briatore, villains such as Schumacher intentionally crashing out Damon Hill in 94 and failing to clearly do the same to Villeneuve in 97, or drivers once praised for being the young underdog to winning it all, becoming resented by fans for becoming quote-unquote boring and quote-unquote always winning, such as Schumacher, Hamilton, Vettel and Verstappen. The third element is qualifying. The French poet and dramatist Pierre Corneille once said, "To win without risk is to triumph without glory," which truly encapsulates qualifying in Formula One. For those who haven't watched motorsport before, qualifying determines the position the cars will line up at the starting grid of a Grand Prix, with the fastest driver awarded pole position, the second fastest awarded the second spot, the third fastest the third spot, and so on. Qualifying happens the day before the race on Saturdays, and typically the race for pole, the top spot of the grid, is close and hard fought. Drivers push the limits of themselves and their car with the one snap of a wheel, a slight lock of the tyres, a catch of the brake over a lap being the difference between fighting for a higher grid spot and throwing the car into the wall. Truly, drivers leave it all on the line, with pole position becoming increasingly important in this era of F1. And legendary races like Monaco, where overtaking is almost impossible, qualifying is the highest importance for the drivers. There are 2 knockout rounds in qualifying, where the bottom 5 drivers are eliminated to the next round, leaving the fastest 10 for the final part of qualifying, Q3. Adding a sense of anxiety if your driver locks up in Q1, the first part of qualifying, it could mean starting from the back of the grid rather than fighting for pole, adding another level of jeopardy to the sport. The fourth element is engineering. In Formula One, each team is obliged to make their own car. To do so, the governing body, the FIA, set out a rulebook before each season and set regulations outlining the parameters the cars has to be within to be acceptable to drive that season. Throughout F1, there has been many different regulations over the 75 seasons of the sport. As cars, technology and drivers develop, F1 is at the centre of that change. In 2025, we are currently at the end of a set of regulations that came in from 2022 season, utilising an aerodynamic philosophy called ground effect. Essentially, whereas the car uses specially shaped underfloor and diffusers to accelerate airflow, sucking the car to the track for more grip, speed and stability. As much as each race on track can be seen as a race between drivers, truly to have a chance of winning the title and even to score points and podiums, the car needs to be one of the most aerodynamic efficient cars with a stable balance and handling, a high performance powerful engine, reliability, and for the factory team to understand a clear development path throughout the season, understanding what upgrades to bring and how much those upgrades can affect car performance. The F1 season is as much of a race on track as it is off track, due to the constant race to outdevelop each team. Last year, for example, Red Bull started the year dominating and winning, but by the midpoint McLaren became the fastest car, And by the tail end of the season, Red Bull was the third fastest car to Ferrari and McLaren, which traded places as the fastest car every other weekend. By the end of the season, this was due to the development path each engineering team took with their respective cars. Overall, that season, McLaren's understanding and being able to develop their overall philosophy the best out of the three teams, winning the team championship known as the Constructors' Championship. The fifth element is racecraft. Racecraft is the art of maximising lap time while staying within the track limits, being able to defend and overtake as well as keep calm under pressure and adapt to all conditions, including changes in weather, crashes and track temperature, fluctuating whilst driving on the racetrack with others. Overtaking sounds simple, but it is truly an art form similar to the precision and technique needed to kick a penalty in the World Cup, shred a guitar solo in front of thousands of fans, or perform a picture-perfect pirouette while ice skating. There are many different techniques of overtaking, and mastering the technique is what separates the good F1 drivers from the great F1 drivers, like Senna, Schumacher, Hamilton and Verstappen, to name a few. A few examples of overtakes include the inside pass, the outside pass, fake moves and manipulation, late braking and diving. My favourite overtake is also the name of this channel, the Switchback, as it allows wheel-to-wheel battles on some tracks for numerous corners and doesn't have to be over in one or two corners. A switchback essentially is where the chasing driver moves off the racing line of the car ahead, going into a corner to hopefully make the leading car feel the pressure and move across to cover the chasing car, allowing the trailing car to switch back to the alternative side of the track and move past the leading car into the following corner of the straight. Staying close and making repeated attempts can also pressure the leading car into a mistake, with overtaking often being a strategic battle of patience, with the goal of the chasing driver to get a better corner exit than the car ahead, allowing for better traction and momentum to allow for a pass or battle. So I'm sure it's obvious by now that F1 isn't racing around circles, but a combination of raw pace over a lap, team strategy, engineering, tyre choices and pit stops mixed in with incredible wheel-to-wheel racecraft, a bit of luck and much more, as well as enough stories, rivalries and drama to keep generations entertained and on the edge of their seats. If you haven't before, I'd love to know if this was enough to check out an F1 race. Let me know in the comments below what other crucial elements make up the sport. What key defining moments do you think of that made you become an F1 fan? Let me know your thoughts on F1 in the comments below, as well as what you want to see next time. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.